Anthony Grassi here for College Town at the 2025 NACDA Convention. Happy to sit down with NAIA President and CEO Jim Carr. Jim, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Good to be with you.
So we'll start, I guess, the biggest picture. How would you describe the state of the NAIA?
I'm very optimistic. I think we're in great shape, but of course, lots of things swirling around us. So, there is a bit of apprehension or tension, I think, among all people in college athletics, in particular people in small college athletics. But we're having a lot of great discussions within the NAIA and trying to figure out how to make sure we're positioned correctly. And so I think there are more opportunities than there are threats.
We sat down a few months ago and you guys rolled out the Right Way to Play campaign. Now that it's officially out and it's been out there for a couple months, what's the reception been so far from within the NAIA membership and broader college athletics?
Yeah, it seems like it's been terrific, at least from the metrics that we monitor. And this is about 2 weeks old now, but at the last count, we had about 25 million people who had viewed it and engaged with us in some way. Our members are just so excited coming out of convention, have been co-branding things on their campus, been social media posts. We do weekly kinds of things with them, and I think it's really done what we had hoped it would do, which is energize the membership. So that's been terrific on that front. I've been out to a number of conference meetings over the last month or so, and that's the main thing one of the main things people want to talk about. Outside of the NAIA, I hear things, so it's more anecdotal, but I think it's resonating with people. People, I'm not one who casts dispersions or just thinks that college athletics is coming to an end because there's so much money coming in. But for people who like sort of the true or maybe the traditional way that college athletics have been run and maybe the way it started, people can kind of identify with NAIA and the way we do things.
Yeah, one of the interesting things you'd said when we sat down a few months ago was the need to continue and further and kind of support the education-based model for athletics. As you think longer term, obviously, as we sit here right now in June, the House settlement is less than a week old,
right.
Officially being approved.
Feels like it's been out there forever, but
right.
official. Yeah.
But officially signed, like T's dotted, I's crossed, or I's dotted, T's crossed. Right. There's some settlement now of the chaos maybe, but there's still a lot potentially out there with court cases, the threats to higher education, all of those different things. So how are you thinking about what needs to change moving forward?
Yeah, I think I might answer that by saying what we hope kind of stays the same. Mm-hmm. So there's all this stuff swirling around us, and you mentioned the House settlement. There's also quite a few court cases that are challenging kind of the traditional eligibility system, whether it be the NCAA clock or our 10 semesters or seasons of competition, even progress towards a degree, maybe GPA, number of hours, all those kinds of things I think are, at least at the highest levels, teetering right now. And so for us, and I think you heard me on a panel yesterday with D2 and D3, I think there's some potential for collaboration for everyone to make sure that we're doing all we can to make sure the courts and people who are making laws understand that education-based model and the need to have rules that encourage and almost force students to pursue their education are needed at our level. And so when I say stay the same, that's the part that we want to see stay the same. I guess you could also argue, well, it's really changed because it's not, there's no assurance that that's going to continue. But that's really where we're going to focus a lot of our time and attention. We're putting a task force together of presidents, ADs, and commissioners to tackle that side of things, but also just to try to decide, are we positioned well when it comes to NIL, when it comes to the transfer situation. People refer to it, I guess, as the transfer portal, but for me it's, all the rules have changed about residency requirements and other restrictions. So looking at all those kinds of things that people are paying a lot of attention to, but just making sure the NAIA is positioned right.
Do you think what are maybe some of the areas from your perspective? Obviously, there's a ton of work to be done on this front, but the collaboration between the NAIA and Division II, Division III, what initially strikes you as an area where those three entities can collaborate to help move that conversation forward?
Yeah, and I'd put the NJCA in there as well, but
sure.
I think the first step would just be trying to get us all together in a room and talk about what are the ways we can work together. I don't know, this is in fairness Division II or Division III, but they're in a different situation because they are part of an association that has Division I. So I can sit here and talk about how we don't need to go in that direction. It needs to be different, and here are the risks and the dangers, but they probably aren't as free to speak about those things. And so I want to be respectful of the positions that Louise and Terry are in leading those organizations. But I do think, and I would put a lot of the the smaller D1 schools in a similar position too, that as I hear people in Congress and other folks talk about the changes that need to happen, it's almost exclusively trying to deal with all the challenges at the Power 4 level or at the big revenue generation level. And so I don't know exactly how we can come together and do it, but I've reached out to them, and my hope is that we'll get together and start to talk about, and they have a bigger platform than we do, so hopefully they can drive through some of their lobbying efforts to make sure that those important people understand there's 98% of college athletics who are in a different position.
Absolutely. Are there conversations you have had, or you've informed your membership of trying to reach out to their representatives, their congressmen, their senators, trying to enlighten them on what the reality is for their respective communities? Obviously, there's a big difference potentially between the top level of Division I and the lower resource schools.
Yeah, and we've started to meet with a few people just from the national office perspective in D.C., like Ted Cruz's office and a few others. But we're realistic. We understand I guess the influence that we wield up there. But we're also partnering with NJC. They've done a good job of Jeff White in their office of making a lot of connections up there. But one of the next steps is, and you basically alluded to it, is working with our membership to figure out who has some connections that can help us as well. But it would obviously be much stronger if we were doing that in collaboration with NCAA as well.
Do you view that as a potential threat, given there's been seemingly much more activity now within Congress to actually get something done? There's been a dozen committee hearings at this point, probably. There's been a number of things thrown around, but it seems like in the last week or so we've seen a lot more actual bill becoming a law steps enacted, put into place.
I do think it's a threat. I remain optimistic because I think at least all the people I've talked with, I think most people in general, want college athletics to remain as a part of higher education and not become completely this professional model, which again doesn't work for the vast majority of folks. So I think if we can do a better job of educating and just make sure people understand that, I think we'll get to a good place.
You mentioned the task force the NAIA is putting together to help evaluate how they maybe need to adjust or adapt during these changes. Are there things that stand out, and maybe from a broader perspective, as the industry continues to shift, what areas maybe stick out to you when you think all of this change, we have been very good at being adaptable, and amongst all this change, we've been able to be a first mover in certain instances. How do we continue to be at the forefront of that and not be so reactive?
Yeah, and I don't know if I can recall off the top of my head the 5 areas that we're gonna dive into, but we've identified 5 areas for this task force, and the first meeting is not until next week. But it's the things that people would think about. So we've got NIL, we have transfer, kind of the whole issue around commercialism and antitrust, and does that even have an impact on the NAIA? Student athletes as employees. And I knew I would not be able to come up with one, but I think people get the gist that to take a look at those things. And for me, it's trying to determine, some of those things like transfers, for example. I think that ship has kind of sailed, and for us to try to create new rules within the NAIA, I think would probably put us at a competitive disadvantage, and probably not something that we would get back to being active in terms of changing. But I think it's worth talking about in terms of, well, how can we help NAIA coaches? How can we help NAIA institutions to deal with all the things that are happening? But something like student athletes as employees, I do think some additional lobbying, some making sure that people understand how that could impact the NAIA, and then helping potentially to put some things in place in our association. If that does happen, how can our schools best deal with it? So we'll go through each of those topics and try to figure out, are there external forces that maybe we can help our schools deal with, but then internally maybe there's some bylaw changes or various things that we can do to help position us as well.
On that employment piece, I know we've discussed that previously. Yep. You have a legal background. I do not, so I'm not going to act like the expert in this situation. But what runs through your mind when you think about how the NAIA could potentially deal with the idea of student athletes as employees?
Yeah, and I will have to say I'm not an employment lawyer, but and I probably shouldn't say this for our membership to hear, but I don't get quite as alarmed about it, I think, as some people do. I think the main issue for our students, because, and we've talked about this, it's pretty rare for an NAIA student athlete to get a complete full scholarship. They might get full tuition and have to pay other things. So the main challenge for our students would be if their scholarships become taxable as a result of being an employee. But campuses have student workers all the time. Students are working odd jobs where they're having to pay taxes, and so I don't know that I don't think the sky's falling quite as much as some people do if that were to happen. Now, having said that, if anything we can do so the scholarships don't become taxable, and people talk about, well, if they become employees, they can start to unionize, and that's going to cause problems for our institutions. That's where I get a little bit out of my realm. I don't really understand all the ramifications of that, so I want to learn a little bit more and see how we can help our members. But for me, that wouldn't be at the top of the list of issues, because one, I'm not at our level. I think calmer heads are going to prevail, and I don't think there's any reason to make anyone outside the Power Four an employee. And I'm not suggesting they should be employees in the Power Four, but there's just not they're not getting paid. They're getting a scholarship, which if you start to make athletic scholarships taxable and employees, then I think you'd have to look at a lot of other scholarships in other areas. That you could also argue that if students are being required to do something and they're getting the scholarship, why aren't they also employees outside of athletics?
Yeah, where do you draw the line at that point? Yeah. Curious, what do you think the opportunity for the association, the NAIA, is right now, given the changes, the evolution that's going on within the NCAA?
Yeah, I think we've done a pretty good job of defining who we are, and I think our members are very comfortable with who we are, and that's an association that's built around character-driven intercollegiate athletics. We give a lot of autonomy to institutions, which for the most part is well received. Sometimes people want you to create a rule if they don't like something that's happened, but I think it allows schools to carry out their mission and use athletics in a very positive way on the campus to drive enrollment and improve finances. So that model works for our current members, and what we're seeing is there's some Division III members who are interested in that because they like the idea of being able to give some athletic aid, which they can't do, at least technically, and I probably shouldn't say that, in Division III. And then in Division II, it's pretty clear that you can be at about the same competitive level for about half the price, half the cost in the NAIA. So those are two pretty powerful things that we're out there talking with people about. And I think depending on how things change, if we can solidify that position and then continue to just educate people around the NAIA, need to make sure that our championships are run well. I think we may talk about our new streaming partner, but doing a lot of the things that people expect traditional athletics to provide. I think we're continuing to get better at those as well. So it's the great thing about getting out and having those conversations with people is that we can make sure they know this is not the NAIA of 20 years ago. It's a different organization.
You took the next question right out of my mouth. So you guys wrapped up year one under your new streaming initiative with the Urban Edge Network and the NAIA Network. What were the big successes for you, and how did you guys compare? What were the results of it compared to what you thought maybe the numbers might be through year one?
Yeah, so maybe just a little bit of context. We had our streaming of championships has been in place for a long time, but it's been behind a paywall.
Correct. Yes.
And essentially the revenue that we made would go to pay for production. We weren't making a lot of net revenue after production, but so for a number of years we wanted to get out from behind that paywall. We wanted more people to be able to see our events. We didn't want parents and grandparents to have to pay $10 to watch their family members participate. But we were really struggling with how do we do it in a way that covers the cost of the production. So we had a chance to visit with the UEN, who was partnering with one of our conferences, the HBCU AC, and they do work with the G League and others, and came to us and said, we have corporate partners who want to get more involved with streaming, and you currently have a good audience. You could have a much bigger audience if you got it out from behind the paywall. So I won't go through all the details, but after 6 to 9 months of discussions with Hardy Pelt and UEN, we came to an agreement that at a minimum would help us cover the cost of production. But we don't have the final numbers yet from spring championships, but especially with LSUS going undefeated, that brought over about 2.5 million views just to baseball, which I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but it's 20, 30, 40-fold times what we've been getting in the past behind the paywall. So, you asked about kind of what we were hoping to accomplish, and did we do it? The main thing was cover our costs, maybe make a little bit of money, but I guess I shouldn't say that's the main thing. The main thing was to expose more people to the NAIA brand, show them what great competition we have, and it's done just that. I mean, we can send you some final numbers, but it's probably going to be 20 times to 30 times the number of viewers we had previously.
And you guys just recently signed an expansion with them to add a few more features to that deal. What is the long-term vision of between the NAI and Urban Edge? Because we've seen them also in the last week partner with 2 of your conferences to do a media rights deal. So they seem very involved and invested in the growth of the NAI.
And you kind of basically said part of my answer, which is trying to get them extended throughout our membership. And those conference deals really aren't going to be revenue producing for us, but I think it's terrific. The Heart of America is a little more comprehensive than the one that the Southern States did, but lots of dollars coming in. Most of their regular season, if not all, is going to be shown through the Urban Edge network, and the advertising will be sold on there. So it's going to be a lucrative deal for them, and a lot more exposure than they've been getting. And I don't know if I can't say with any certainty that Urban Edge Network has the capacity to do that for every one of our conferences, but I know there's still a lot of capacity left. And so my goal would be for them to get out and work with as many conferences as possible. We also our extension or our expansion is a little bit around a game of the week and some things like that. So I think all those pieces fit nicely, and will continue to generate revenue and exposure.
As you think through that bigger picture, obviously, there is a capacity to streaming, but is there value in the mass from a media rights perspective or others, of having all 250 some odd members of the NAI within the same group, within the same umbrella, whether it's for media rights, whether it's for specific partnerships? Obviously, you guys do a ton of partnerships to cover a lot of different areas that are valuable for your membership.
Yeah, I think so. I mentioned the word autonomy, which is a big word in the NAI. People want to be able to do their own thing, and so I don't think we'd ever get to a place where we would dictate that. But if the benefits or the value is there, I think we could see all or most all come in. And in addition to, I think there's some great branding opportunities, because I think if we're able to do that, I think people would be willing to let us come alongside them with some NAI branding. And we're already seeing that with the 2 conferences signed on board. We're going to have our Right Way to Play videos and things like that as a part of it. So the branding's there, but I also think it'll go a long way towards the quality of production. It's, as you might imagine, very uneven in terms of regular season quality and just some schools not even really available, or if it is, it's probably not the quality that most people would want. So if we were able to get everyone or most everyone under the same umbrella, I think quality would have to go up, because we could start pulling our resources and doing some things that could buy new equipment for everyone and things like that. So there's certainly some advantages to people coming under the same tent.
One of the notable things that was mentioned during session yesterday with Louise at D3 and Roberta as Management Council Chair for D2 was the ability to help recruit and retain student athletes. I imagine there's a ton of angles to that. What comes to what are kind of the top of mind things that the association can do to help member institutions recruit and retain their student athletes?
Yeah, so I guess first I would say our coaches do an amazing job. We've grown our student athlete population at a higher percentage than anyone else out there that we're aware of, year over year for the last 5, probably more than 5 years. So that population is growing, and our schools are doing a great job of bringing in new student athletes. But we don't want to just assume that's going to continue to happen. So that was one of the reasons for our Right Way to Play campaign and our new branding advocacy approach, because our members were saying, we want to advocate for the NAIA. We want to tell prospective students you can come in and be part of this great organization, in addition to their conference, and obviously they're mostly selling their school and their program. But our coaches are appreciative of these new resources and materials they have to at least make sure people understand what the NAIA is all about. So that's helping on the recruiting side. I also think we're doing this pretty consistently, but now's a good time to also take a look at our recruiting rules, anything that impacts how schools can recruit and retain students, and make sure that we at least are putting them on a level playing field, if not giving them some advantages. I mean, there are already some advantages because we don't have nearly as many restrictions on coaches and how they can interact with students. We think time between coaches and students is a good thing. I mean, it can get out of hand, I guess, and students don't have a life outside of athletics, but we rely on our schools to do that. So continuing to monitor those kinds of rules and make sure that they're working for coaches and things like that. And then on the retention side, I really think it's more of collaboration with our ADs to try to make sure that schools are creating a great culture so students want to stay. I don't know if there's any magic bullet that we can provide to say, here's how you can keep students from transferring, because it's going to happen. It's a new world, and I think we need to adapt and just make sure we're doing well in it.
We talked a lot about the potential threats to the association.
Yeah.
I'm curious, we'll start, I guess, in the next year or two. What are the biggest opportunities that you see ahead for the association?
Yeah, I think the main one, and we alluded to it a little bit, but is just solidifying our position as the way college athletics was meant to be. I think the right way to play is a nod to that. So I think, but it's one thing for us to pat ourselves on the back and talk about it internally, but just making sure that we're continuing to let the public know out there. I also, along those lines, think not just the NAIA, but since I'm only speaking for the NAIA, I'll just talk about us. I think we have a great opportunity to really be viewed as a place that's a home for high school students who want to go on to play college athletics, because at least in the media and at the highest levels, you hear people like Rick Pitino. I heard an interview with him recently. He said, we're not even looking at high school students, and that's the very highest level of college basketball. But there's this perception, and I think somewhat a reality, that high school students are getting left behind, and we're recruiting students who aren't going to, in that case, St. John's, but aren't going to Tennessee or Texas to play sports. But there are a lot of good places where they can go and continue to do something they love, and that's always been there. But I think in this environment, it's a real opportunity to make sure parents in particular know about that.
How do you think about the same question through maybe a 10, 15, more long-term lens?
Oh man, I'm just trying to get through tomorrow. No, we think a lot about the long-term future. Our strategic plan just goes through the next couple of years. But what that plan is about, and I think this would continue into 5 and 10 years, is but a lot of things we already talked about. But the idea behind it is, how do we help our members work through disruption? And we talk here mostly about college athletics, but higher ed has its own set of challenges. And then with the political situation the way it is, that's bringing in more pressure and tension into the higher ed system. So I want us to be seen as an association that understands the business of small college athletics, but with the purpose of helping schools use athletics to have a positive impact on the rest of campus. So for some, it might be improving enrollment. For others, it might be contributing to the bottom line through getting their discount rate down and doing things that can help with maybe creating JV programs, whatever it might be on the campus that has a positive impact. Because if all small private schools and even some publics are at risk right now, and so if they can use athletics to help them not only survive but to become sustainable and thrive, that's part of our goal.
Are there changes more broadly, whether that's within the NAI or bigger, or across the whole industry, that as we think about the future of small college athletics, need to happen to help given the moment that we're in, the uncertainty around enrollment, higher education, the macroeconomic landscape? There's a litany of challenges.
Right.
But are there solutions that, through collaboration, we can figure out to help maybe solidify the ground that all the athletic departments in the NAI stand on?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we certainly can do lots of things with our 250 members to collaborate and really think carefully about just the kinds of things I talked about. I mean, then there are a lot of other organizations. We do a lot of things with CIC, the Council of Independent Colleges, with CCCU, which is Christian colleges and universities. So we want to continue to collaborate with those folks because they know a lot more about the academic and the higher ed side than we do, but that's equally as important for our members. So bringing those types of groups together, we talked a little bit about trying to influence the political scene. We want to continue to do that, but that's a whole different world than we're normally in. So I think we've got to kind of choose our topics and our lanes there. But I don't have a lot of specifics around that, but I'm hopeful. I mean, higher ed is one of the things that's made this country great in what it is, and I think it's been under attack for a while now. And people are asking some legitimate questions about is there really value there? Is it too expensive? All those kinds of things. But I'm hopeful that that's not going to lead to people just wanting to blow the whole thing up, which I don't think is going to happen. But all of those of us who are in it, we need to work hard to make sure it doesn't happen.
Excellent. Well, Jim, thank you so much for joining me today at NACDA.
Yeah, Anthony, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.